Are you ept, ain, or ert?
Have you ever felt whelmed, gusted, or gruntled?
Don't know? You're about to find out in another Words Unravelled.
Welcome to another Words Unravelled. I'm Jess Zafaris, author of etymology books and editor of the Useless Etymology blog.
And I'm Rob Watts from the YouTube channel Rob Words. And in this episode, we're not talking about the words that English does have, but more the ones that it doesn't.
That's right, it's time to rediscover some lost positives, rehome some orphaned negatives, and play Cupid to some unpaired words.
So first things first, what's an unpaired word, Jess?
So an unpaired word is a word that isn't often found without its prefixes or suffixes or other elements. One good example is the word disgusted. We have this word, but we don't typically use the word gusted, right, to mean that we are the opposite of disgusted. So it has no natural opposite, you might say. Now, the word disgusted arrived in English in the late 16th century from the French déguste, the opposite of taste, basically, or distasteful, literally. And its Latin root is the Latin gustare, which meant to taste. So gust, if it existed in English, would simply mean taste.
So these are words, basically, that should and could exist within the grammatical rules of English and the rules that allow us to compile words. They should exist, but for some reason, they don't. Now, in some cases, they have done in the past, and in others, they've never existed. So we'll try and sort of separate those two different categories as we move along here. But there's some amazing stories behind all of these. I'll let you explain about welming, because this is one that comes up a lot.
Yes, this one you might call a untrioed pair rather than unpaired word. I think this one has gotten a lot of play because it shows up in pop culture a lot. But we have the words overwhelmed and we have the words underwhelmed, but we don't typically use the word whelm unless we are winking and nodding to the fact that we don't say those things. And you would think that since we have overwhelmed and underwhelmed on those two ends of the spectrum, that whelmed would just mean I'm just okay. I'm not overwhelmed by too many things. I'm not underwhelmed or unimpressed. I'm just whelmed. But the root word here is an Old English word that means to cover over or to overthrow or to submerge completely, like a ship in rough water specifically. And that's sort of how we use the word overwhelm now. And that's what that is. It's a big hyperbole of the original word whelm. And then underwhelmed showed up a little bit later as sort of a playful twist on overwhelmed. So now we have, in a way, all three, at least to the extent that people joke about it.
Yeah, so as you say, underwhelmed basically was coined to be an opposite of overwhelmed, but you couldn't actually, although actually if you think about it, if you were to underwhelm a boat, that would sound like you were also sort of drowning it.
Yeah, that sounds pretty bad too. I don't want to be any kind of whelmed on the sea unless it's the boring kind.
Indeed. And there are a few more of these where there's been a very deliberate sort of coining of an opposite of a word. Mm-hmm. Gruntled is one, because we've had disgruntled, but I don't think we've ever actually had gruntled. It is in the dictionary, but the only reason you'll find it in the dictionary is because it was used by the author P.G. Wodehouse,
of course,
a writer that I absolutely adore. And it's from one of his books called Code of the Woosters. So, Bertie Wooster and his lot. And it says, I could see that if not actually disgruntled, he was far from being gruntled. That's the earliest citation you'll find of gruntled in the dictionary, because despite it being possible to be disgruntled, you couldn't be gruntled. But that's because the dis in this sense is not a negator. It's not negating the gruntlement. It's actually augmenting it. It's like when we say distribute, right? That is to spread tribute widely, not to untribute. And so disgruntled is to gruntle widely, and gruntle is to grunt. It's basically, to be disgruntled is to be like an irritated pig.
To be grumbly about it. That makes sense. I like that. It also reminds me of terms that we run into about being annoyed that include the term off, like ticked off, or the more PG-13 rated version of that. The word by itself also means I'm already grumpy, but adding off to it makes it, it intensifies it, much like that dis prefix.
I never thought of it like that, but you're absolutely right. The off should negate it, but instead it just makes it stronger, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Nonchalant. There we go. If you're disgruntled, then it's fair to say that you are probably not feeling too nonchalant about the situation. But it's not possible to be chalant, is it?
Well, I mean, I find that I'm often chalant in its literal sense, but typically no, we're not. Not in English. Tell us a little bit about the root of that word.
So it comes from ultimately Latin, calanes. I think it's calanes. I'm not very good at the old Latin pronunciation, although there's no Romans here to correct me, so let's not worry about it. Which means hot, heated. We then get it through French via chalon, which means warm, right? Chaleur is heat in French. So to be nonchalant is to be not too hot-headed. Therefore, to be chalant would be to be all sort of worked up and hot-tempered, I suppose.
So I've also heard that, and these words are all related. That heat is also inherent in the French chalois, meaning to care about or to matter to. So what I've also read is that nonchalant would suggest that nothing matters to you, or your behavior suggests a lack of interest, which also implies a lack of emotional heat about something. While chalant would hypothetically imply that you are very interested or emotionally invested or blazing with curiosity about something.
Interesting thing about nonchalant is that it's quite possible that the word was invented by the English, right? The earliest citations of that word are not in French. They're in English.
Interesting. That would make sense because the prefix on it is the Latin non, which is also a word in French, but doesn't typically get tacked on to words like that.
That's such a good point. Yeah, like we mentioned earlier with dégoûtant, it would more make sense for it to be déchalant than it would be to be nonchalant. I hadn't thought of it like that. And the word chalant, by the way, hasn't existed in French, I don't think either, and certainly hasn't existed in English as an opposite to nonchalant. But we did briefly have a word that was chalant, right?
Ooh.
Which meant warm or hot, but it's taken more directly from that calanes, that Latin word from which we get the sort of French idea of heat.
I didn't know the word chalant. Thank you for teaching me that.
I had to dig pretty deep to find that one, but it was there.
Speaking of that prefix non, it's also attached to another unpaired word, as we often say it, or an orphan of some kind, nonplussed, which this one generates a lot of discussion because of its apparent meaning. People typically misinterpret it. Nonplus in Latin means no more, suggesting that a person who is nonplussed is in such a state of surprise and confusion that they have no more to say or do about it. And to be plussed then would suggest an ability or the motivation to take further action versus being like shocked into unawareness. But a lot of people consider nonplussed to be like unimpressed. I'll see people misusing it in that way.
And it's been misused, and I'm going to put inverted commas around that because we're always careful with saying misused these days. But it's been misused to the extent that is basically a meaning of it now, which is kind of irritating. It's irritating when that happens, isn't it?
I know. I'm like, you're not wrong, but I want you to be.
No language changes. We don't have to like it. So many more of these orphaned negatives, lost positives, if you want to call them either of those things. Another one that I really like when I discovered it was such a revelation for me because I'd never thought of the initial word as being sort of negative in a sort of way. I'm saying negative, right, to try and stress that it has an element to it that negates something. I mean, obviously that's exactly the same as the word negative, but I'm just trying to be clear. And the one that I'm thinking of is nocent, the opposite of innocent. I never imagined that this word had existed. The word guilty ultimately won the battle in English, but we kept this sort of French version of the opposite to it. And it was perfectly possible to be nocent. I've got a quote that includes the word nocent, actually, from around 1685. And it says, this is in a letter to James II, so a letter to the king. And in it, it describes how whoever wrote its rivals had killed all that came in their way without discriminating nocents from innocents.
Ooh, I like that. That's
It's cool, that
interesting.
one.
There's also, a double meaning to innocent and nocent here too, right? Because nocent, the literal meaning is knowing, which kind of pulls in the that biblical sense of like knowing of things to be an attachment to guilt or to sin. But it also nocent could also be said to imply the opposite of innocent in the naive sense. So knowing versus not knowing.
To be innocent is to be unknowing, isn't it? It's to be naive. I love that. By the way, I discussed this is as big a name drop as you can get in word nerd circles, but I discussed this one with Susie Dent. Yeah, you know who Susie Dent is. I don't know if she's as well known in the States as she is in Britain. In Britain, she's in something called Dictionary Corner on a TV game show about words. Where she's basically the go-to person for finding obscure words and their explanations. Anyway, she was kind enough to come on my YouTube channel. And when I said, I love this lost positive nocent, she said, actually, that is a lost negative.
Huh.
I said, what do you mean? She says, well, to be nocent is a bad thing. So we've lost the negative. And so this is why I've been stressing the whole negative thing about the fact that, we're losing prefixes that appear to negate something. So I got it in my head that a lost negative was where not that the sort of sense, the feeling of the word was negative, but more that it just negated the other word. But according to Susie Dent, who is really the sort of oracle on this sort of thing, I'm wrong. And I should change my mind.
Well, I'm gonna debate that a little bit because I think innocent can be used both pejoratively and positively. To say someone is innocent can be a symbol of purity, but to say someone is, oh, you're so innocent, like that sounds like a Southern complisalt, one of those things that could say that you don't know enough, you're naive and unprepared. So I think that could be an orphan negative or a lost positive.
You're totally right. And now that you've pointed out that it just means not knowing, unknowing, then absolutely it can be a negative, can't it? And I hadn't thought of it like that.
I'd like to be innocent of a crime, but I don't want to be so innocent that I'm unwilling to be savvy in a challenging or intellectual situation.
And fall victim to a crime.
Precisely.
And Susie came back with another example, immaculate versus maculate.
What does maculate mean?
Yeah, so it comes from Latin and it means stained, right?
Ooh,
Yeah, so to be immaculate is to be unsullied, untarnished, unstained. So to be maculate would be to be stained. And we do have words along those lines. If you've got an eye condition where your eyesight is degenerating, we call it macular degeneration.
Oh, yes,
right?
You're right.
And that is where your eyesight is becoming sort of stained. It's becoming sort of foggy. But an even better example that I realized while I was in the coffee shop the other day is the word macchiato, which comes from the same
no
source.
way.
Yes, it does. So I shouldn't get so excited about this.
I love that we're both learning so much from this episode.
This is gold, really, mixing two of my loves, coffee and etymology. So macchiato means stained. That's what it means. And you have either a latte macchiato, which is milk that has been stained with a little bit of coffee, or you have an espresso macchiato, which is coffee, a cafe macchiato, if you will, which is coffee that has been stained with a little bit of frothy milk.
Oh my goodness, that is both adorable and fascinating. I love this.
Yeah.
In a similar vein, I'm reminded of the word ineffable, and we can debate whether this one is a positive or a negative here, because ineffable is from the 14th century. It's something beyond expression due to its greatness, like God's ineffable wisdom. Sadly, not because you're unable to give an F about it, but its elements make it look like a double negative at first, in the same way, because it operates as an intensifier. It means like the opposite of speaking, literally, like unable to speak. So something effable by that logic would be something you are able to speak or say aloud, rather than the speechlessness implied by something that is ineffable.
To be effable definitely sounds saucy. And there's another one that sounds saucy that it reminds me of, and that is the fact that we can be feckless, but we can't be feckful.
Now, this one is related to the word effect, right?
Exactly. Effect and feck are basically the same word, right? And they've just sort of separated off. And indeed, it was possible to be feckful at one time. I've got a quote for this one from 1568. I could not come without some great and feckful purpose. You see?
I love that.
To be feckful was to be effective, to be efficacious, I suppose, to be efficient. There's a lot of sort of feck adjacent words in English.
And feckless means useless rather than not giving a feck about it. That's an interesting one. So one pair that I think is kind of interesting, because it's not exactly orphaned, but it appears in different forms in its different positive and negative senses. And it's the term ruthless and the word rueful, right? Because ruth is a noun form of the word rue, which means to bitterly regret something, as in the phrase, you'll rue the day you said this word wrong, or something along those lines. And a ruthless person doesn't regret their actions, no matter how awful. They don't rue anything. They're brutal to the extent that they have no regrets for the damage that they do. And then ruthless does have that opposite in the word rueful. We don't say ruthful. And my understanding is that rue is the older word, and then ruth was from Old Norse, rue from Old English, ruth from Old Norse, and they melded together, modeled after the pairing of the adjective like true and the noun truth, and the verb grow and the noun growth. So it tacked on that little th ending to create ruth from rue.
When I first came across the fact that the word Ruth meant sort of merciful, I suppose, I thought, oh, that's why we call people Ruth. It's a nice sort of, it's like calling them Mercy. But then I discovered it's not true at all. Actually, the name Ruth comes from a Hebrew word for friendship. But nevertheless, that extra double meaning, I think, is something that all Ruths should be pleased to have on their side. Did I pluralize Ruth as Ruths a second ago, by the way?
I don't think so.
I think
Maybe, I don't know.
It's a plural of Ruths. It might be.
I think it's perfect.
But you pointed out that Ruth comes from Old Norse, and there's another one of these that comes from Old Norse. And I guess it makes sense that we might only take one side of something if we're borrowing it from another language like this. But it's possible to be gormless. It's not possible to be gormful. Now, it's never in English been possible to be gormful, but it has been possible to take gorm, which is a phrase that we get from the Vikings, from Old Norse. And to take gorm is to pay attention to something, right? To pay heed. Okay, so to be gormless is basically to just be unaware, to be not paying enough attention.
What I'm learning here, what we're untangling, I think, is that, rather unraveling, you might say, is that some of these were adopted directly from other languages. And then some of them, the base form without any prefixes or suffixes, may have existed in older versions of English, and we just don't use the other term anymore. And one that I like in that vein is wistful. Wist is a pretty archaic term now, meaning to know, and it existed in Old English. It had a different form, but it became associated with bittersweet melancholy or nostalgia through the Middle and early modern English term had I wist or had he wist, a noun meaning regret for a rash action, and especially in the term of phrase had a wist cometh over too late, basically meaning regret for knowledge of the rashness of one's actions always comes too late. That regret for your mistakes always comes around too late.
Oh, that's a sort of word that we could kind of do with these
Uh-huh.
days, actually. Yeah.
It's sort of a parallel to the way we use like hindsight is 2020.
Yeah. An obvious word, you're talking about borrowings, one that we've quite obviously borrowed from French is the word inevitable. But we no longer have the word evitable, although we totally did. So inevitable is the French word for unavoidable, and something that is evitable or evitable, I don't know how we'd have pronounced it, is something that is avoidable.
Is that related to the word evade?
Oh, it must be, right? I mean,
that sounds about right.
I don't know for
it's
sure.
either that or something similar, right?
Shall we do Shall I do some live Googling and have a look?
Why not?
Why not?
A little anecdote here. When I was a kid, one of the things that set me off onto the path of etymology is I had a French teacher. She was an absolute dynamo of a person. Her name was Nanette Quinn. And one time we were supposed to do a reading for French class, and we came to class, and we came across a word in the reading that none of us had looked up. It wasn't on our vocab sheets, and we didn't bother looking it up in the dictionary. There was an awkward pause where she asked us, what does this word mean? Then she exploded and was like, why would you choose to be ignorant rather than looking it up when you have the resources to find out? So I think it's good for you and I, especially if we don't know things, to be looking it up. And I'd love for our audience to embrace that as well. If you find a word you don't know or you want to know something about it, look it up. The knowledge is right there.
Yeah, it is. And if you look in the right places, you'll find all kinds of wonderful rabbit holes to go down. That's the one thing that you lose so much time researching this. I lose so much time on tangents, time well spent, but at the same time not necessarily contributing to the podcast. I quickly just had a look up evade. It doesn't actually have the same root as evitable. No, it doesn't. No, it comes from Latin vedere, which means to go. And so it's got a prefix of the e, that e makes it to go out. Yeah, it's to go away from rather than to avoid. So there truly is a difference between tax evasion and tax avoidance.
Interesting. Good stuff. Thank you for looking that up.
No problem.
So that means evade has that implied or assimilated Latin ex prefix, meaning like off or away from. Another unpaired word that we sometimes run into is exasperate, which the opposite of that is asperate. Not quite.
I have no idea where that one could come from. Exasperate. It sounds like like breathing or something, right?
Right.
I'm so exasperated.
It's surprisingly not related to that, despite the fact that they sound exactly the same. It means exasperate, of course, means to frustrate or annoy someone. And it entered English directly from Latin as exasperare, but it literally means to roughen something. And it's the root is asper, meaning rough, and the X prefix is an intensifier, like we were talking about before. So to thoroughly rough something up is what exasperate means. The fact that it grates on you, kind of like sandpaper, is the implication here.
It's a bit like it's ruffled your feathers. It's roughed you up. It's rubbed you up the wrong way. You've exasperated me. I like
and
that.
It does have a relative in English. Asperity means hardship, literally implying a rough patch in your life.
I guess I'm glad that I didn't know that word already.
Right.
But now I'll be well prepared when the next one comes along.
Mm-hmm. It also, just FYI, is not related to the word aspersion either. You might think it would be, but aspersion, funny enough, means to sprinkle something on. It's from ad spargere, meaning to sprinkle or strew things on someone. So to cast aspersions on them is to sprinkle negativity on something.
I feel like we're getting closer and closer to the word asparagus again,
right.
Which we've already talked about before, and it's asparagrass. Mm-hmm. Great. Do you know if it's possible to be ept?
Inept. Oh, I would think you could be perhaps apt, but I don't think ept.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. So you can be apt. And you could be ept, because apt and ept were basically exactly the same thing. To be inept and to be inapt are exactly the same thing. They both mean to be inappropriate for the situation. And you can kind of see that in the meanings of both. But since we lost ept as a variant of apt, this has not been a word for many, many centuries, other than in its use as a deliberate and humorous opposite to inept. So to be ept. I've got a few more examples of these. Oh yeah, here's a great quote from Time magazine from 1966. With the exception of one of two semantic twisters, I think it is a first-rate job. Definitely ept, ain, and ert.
Inept and inert. Fantastic. It is interesting that we have inaptitude, something that you're not good at, and ineptitude, being clumsy.
Oh, you're so good at this. I don't spot all of these. Yeah. They are hiding in plain sight, a lot of these.
Mm-hmm. Another one, speaking of ineptitude, is the word unwieldy. We use the word wield, but we don't typically say that something is wieldy. It's only unwieldy, meaning clumsy or too cumbersome to use. And wield here, wieldy, is an Old English word meaning active or vigorous that didn't stick around. In the 14th century, unwieldy meant powerless or without strength rather than clumsy. I mean, you might be clumsy as a result of being unable to handle something heavy. And that's kind of the idea here. Someone who lacks strength might be clumsy with a weapon or a heavy tool. So by the 16th century, unwieldy had evolved into a word for clumsiness or gracelessness, or in the sense that kind of persists today, something that's difficult to handle gracefully due to its size.
Yeah, you can imagine a big old sword being so heavy it's unwieldy. One cannot wield it sufficiently because of its cumbersomeness. Is that a word?
I like
cumbersomeness.
That.
Yeah,
I approve.
it is by now.
Well, that was so much fun. There are so many more examples of these. I know we could talk for hours about these, but I would also love to know what our listeners and viewers find in the world and in the wild while they're looking for unpaired words. So if you can think of any, let us know on social media, post in the comments. We'd love to discuss more of them and the roots that inspired these words.
Hey, and who's to say we can't do a bit of matchmaking and repair or even invent a few new pairings ourselves? Like Jess says, in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube, or you can actually email us. Hey, we never give out the email address. Should we give the email address out?
Yeah, let's do it.
wordsunravelledpod@gmail.com.
Perfect.
And that's all for this episode of Words Unravelled. Thanks a lot for watching or listening, and we'll catch you in the next one.
See you next week.